entrepreneur and brand consultant by choice. And it is really my privilege today to be the moderator of today's session. We're going to do a lot of crystal gazing of sorts. So very excited. So with the COVID number count increasing by the day, I think these are really worrying times. So let us hope that things come under control and a vaccine is found soon. I also take this opportunity to remind all of you not to be adventurous and not venture out of your houses unless it is really required. Stay indoors and stay safe is the mantra. So on behalf of the Young Leaders Council and AIMA, a big warm welcome to all of you for today's webinar, and especially Abheek for today's topic, which is the road ahead and retail and consumer market trends. So these are really unprecedented times, and I'm sure a lot of us are grappling for answers with regard to many aspects, and especially today's topic, right? The future of retail business and consumer at large, that way. And future that way is one powerful word because we all wish we knew our future. So I'll tell you one thing, nobody really has the answers, but we are going to see today, what we're going to see today is a lot of perspectives, great perspectives from an expert who has seen and done it all. And at the end of the webinar, I'm sure we will be able to gather enough wisdom to chart out our future, a future which all of us want to create. So coming to the speaker, what a speaker we have today to throw some light on the future of retail and consumer. Abheek Singhi, Managing Director and Senior Partner of Boston Consulting Group. I'm a big fan of brand purpose, and I really love the purpose statement of BCG, Abheek, unlocking the potential of those who advance the world. Really loved it when I looked it up. Just introducing Abheek. Abheek has led Boston Consulting Group's consumer and retail practice in Asia Pac region and has been a member of the global practice leadership team. He comes with more than 20 years of experience with clients across the globe, and Abheek has partnered closely with large as well as mid-sized corporations across various sectors in delivering transformative impact. So he comes with deep experience, especially in strategy development and execution. And in the recent years, he's worked closely with organizations to deploy the impact of digital technologies and analytics for these businesses. So buzzwords are there. With Abheek has been a member of the National FMCG Committee and is also a member of the Aspen Global Leadership Network. He's been named as the top 100 retail minds in Asia Pac retail, as well as top 100 in Indian fashion and luxury. So all of you seeking answers about digital technologies, retail, fashion, luxury, you know who to shoot your questions to. Share your questions in the Q&A window, and I'll make sure I'll try to cover as much as we can if time permits. Abheek is also the co-founder, co-author of the best-selling BCG book, the 10 trillion prize dollar published by Harvard Business Review Press. So without further ado, let us hear from Abheek. Over to you, Abheek. Let's unlock the potential of our attendees today.
Thank you. Thank you, Laeeq, and thank you, YLC, for inviting me. You know, I was having a conversation in one of the webinars, and you know, I think there are three questions that everybody asks on webinars. I think the first one is, you know, how long is this going to last? Second is, you know, will consumer behavior change, and how much will it change when the new normal happens? And the third, especially if you are on a webinar, is, am I audible? Okay.
Yes, you are very much audible.
Okay. No, more seriously, you know, I hope that all of you are, you know, safe in your respective homes or wherever you are. As like mentioned, you know, please take care. I think, you know, this is a time to be cautious and conscious. Like, thank you for the introduction. I would just say one thing. I think I want to use the next 25 minutes or so to share some perspective. But rather than think of it as being the definitive or the last word, I would be the first one to admit that, some of the trends that we are seeing are so different, because the cause and origin are so different, that anybody who actually says that they have the definitive answer, uh, you know, it doesn't really have that. So, think of it as a starting point of view, a perspective. And the way I think about, the next hour or so is this is more of a conversation and the start of a conversation rather than the end or the final point of view. Right? So let me start off with that disclaimer and moving on to just give me a second. Yeah. So to the one point I do want to talk about is, if you really think about consumers, there is a piece which I call the ABC of consumer, and I'm going to be talking about some elements of ABC of these trends, which is attitudes, behavior, and the actual consumption. And the reason I think it's important to distinguish between the three is, many times, many people, including myself, have done a fair bit of consumer research. And then, more often than not, the discussion moves in terms of saying, okay, so what is it that the consumer said? And the fact is, what the consumer really thinks, wants, versus what they say and what they do are three different things. And so, the first thing I would say is, as we think about this journey, we need to disaggregate and think about the three differently, and think about what is it really which the consumer is saying, what is it that they are doing, and what is it that we are able to decipher from the same. So if you look at just from a perspective um, of the attitude, I think some things are very clear. Some attitudes have changed. There is a fear of virus. It's very clear. There is an economic fear which is there. People are losing jobs. There is a fear of drop in personal income that has already happened. And in some sense, it's non-debatable. I think the interesting question is, are there some attitudes which may change midterm? And to my mind, the five that I have highlighted here, I think there is a significant likelihood that this would happen. Cocooning is what I mean in terms of people being staying at home. So human beings are social creatures, but we are being forced to stay at home, almost in hibernation, in a state of cocooning. And therefore, I'm sure as you would have seen your homes, you would want to do something different to your homes. What do you do when you're in a cocoon? So that, I think that's the first one. The second one is, to my mind, the most interesting, important, debatable, whichever one way you put it, which is around minimalism. These times have shown that one can do with less. Now, is that going to have a situation where in the midterm people are actually going to have this minimalism, adopt it? Even before COVID happened, there was a theme of minimalism, at least in some segments, starting to happen. There have been documentaries around minimalism. There have been about the Japanese way of life and reducing that. But is that going to happen, or is there going to be revenge shopping? So the day the luxury stores opened in China after the lockdown in China, Hermes actually saw its largest single day sale ever, right? So it can go both ways. The third, I think, is a somewhat of a more obvious one, which is around low touch or contactless. And given that people are spending so much time online than before, what is the implication of that from a privacy trust perspective? Given that traceability is important, but do you actually, as a consumer, allow that to happen for either the short term or the medium term? So that's the piece about attitudes. The second is about behaviors. And see, this is where the interesting dichotomy starts to happen. And to my mind, these are the three paradoxes in some sense which are there. There is everything. So the dominant narrative that you will hear is everybody is going online, everybody wants to do something, um, only in a digital manner. However, if you think about it, uh, who gained most in this time period from a retail perspective was actually the small kirana stores, right? So it's almost like a paradox which is there. The second is the engagement. So, everybody, all of us would have reached out to our friends, family, loved ones more. There is a desire to be connected, but in a contactless manner. So that's the second paradox which is there. And the third, and I'll just share some data here, is actually, if you look at it, and this is what happened in the first month of uh, of the lockdown in India. After a long time, what you found was the absolute increase in viewership was actually more on TV than in terms of digital, right? Now, over a period of time, that has tapered down, and both of them have increased by about 25 minutes on the size of digital and about 30 minutes on TV. But actually, TV has gained over over this period of time compared to any time in the last 5 years. So the relative share of TV has actually increased. And if you look at it, even within digital, it's the social apps which have gained share. So this is to the point that I was saying, TV and digital both are increasing. And within that also, it's the connectedness, which is the theme which is there. And consumers, like always, are being a bit paradoxical in how they approach this. And the third piece, which is the reality in terms of what are they buying, what are they spending money on. No surprises there. The only point I want to make here is some of what consumers are doing is not only because of demand side situations, but because of what's happening from a supply side. Suppliers were facing complexity. They reduced the size in terms of the number of SKUs, complexity reduced, and therefore people moved up in terms of the SKU sizes, right? So there's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy which is happening there. So as we think about this paradigm shift in terms of the ABC of consumer, the one other thing I'd like to share with you is what I'm calling this product pyramid. Now, I'm assuming that many of you are there not only as consumers, but you're also running some business in some form or fashion. All of you would have seen some version of an income pyramid of India. But I want to lay out that there's actually a product pyramid. And if you really think about it, is almost everybody consumes the essentials: food, utility, electricity, etc. Then on top of that are the small luxuries, maybe a pair of jeans, a t-shirt. And then if you go above, then it is a two-wheeler. And then really, if you think about it, it's either premium categories or services which require being close. Now, what has actually happened? What you see is the bottom half of this pyramid, which is the essentials, which constitutes about 55% of the consumption in India, actually has largely remained untouched. Obviously, it has declined a bit, but largely remained untouched. What the decline has actually happened is in the top half. So, as you think about, my mental model is, if you think about the 55%, which is the essentials, that has largely remained untouched. Actually, some parts of it have even seen an increase. If you look at the other lens of thinking about it, about 50% of our consumption is rural. Large part of rural again has remained untouched. And therefore, when consumption has reduced, it has reduced because of the factors that you see on the black on the right, which is income and liquidity impacting more the bottom half. And at the top, it's actually access and confidence. So the reason why saloons are actually essential, but you don't have access to the same, and therefore you're not seeing any business happening there. you know, when people are actually having question marks in terms of what's going to happen in terms of income, it's unlikely people will upgrade a new TV to a new TV or upgrade their car. If their refrigerator or washing machine, stops functioning, yes, there is going to be an upgrade which will happen. However, if the confidence is not there, then it's unlikely that the consumption is going to happen, right? Um, this is a summary, of research that BCG has done. We actually did a set of 4 distinct researches over the last 3-4 months, every 2 to 3 weeks, and I have many slides on the same. I don't want to take you through each and every slide, but those actually have the facts in terms of what's happening from an overall sentiment perspective, category perspective, purchase behavior perspective, digital adoption perspective, and most importantly, I think the question which is there on people's mind is around recovery, right? What I will do is select a few of those to go through, and like just wanted to get your sense. Would it be okay if I take the next 10-12 minutes to go through the next set of slides? Will that give us
Yes,
enough
yes,
time?
yes.
Okay, great. Right. So let me go through some of these slides quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides, but it will give you a sense. So first of all, this is sentiment. This is the work that we've done across different markets. Actually, consumer sentiment in India is similar to global markets. So, here are few countries that have compared in terms of economic concerns, health concerns, daily lifestyle, and actually, the world, barring China, is in a similar place. Fact number 1. Fact number 2, interestingly, who is more concerned about the future? Who is less concerned about the future? Actually, older people, more affluent people are less concerned about the future. Again, makes sense because they have, from an income perspective, the older, the affluent um, have a buffer which is there, which is a luxury that the strugglers or the next billions don't have. And some of the older ones have seen something like this before. If you look at across categories, and this is a view across 2-3 months, you actually find that each of these dots is a category. And people are actually planning to decrease spends. There are a few categories where people are planning to increase spends. No surprises as to what those are. Those are essentially the essentials. If you look at this picture, it shows you people are planning to spend more on daily essentials, health insurance, education, at-home entertainment, media. No surprises. If you look at the bottom half of this page, are places where people are planning to cut down spends on. No surprises. All of this intuitively makes a lot of sense. This, I think, is an interesting one, which is there is one part as to, are people going to consume less or more? The second is, they may consume the same amount, but will they buy something a little bit more expensive, or will they trade up or trade down? In times of crisis, and we've seen this even in the great financial crisis of 2007-8, a similar theme had happened. People are willing to trade up in a set of categories and trade down in a certain set of categories. Staple household are typically categories where trading up is more than trading down. There are a set of categories, for example, mobile is an interesting one, where actually trade up and trade down is the same. Because actually for many of us, mobile is an essential. For some of us, mobile is a discretionary, right? So how do you think about that is this picture that you see on this page. Not surprisingly, shopping in malls is likely to be worst hit. People are preferring e-commerce, largely driven by contactless purchase and offers and discounts. So, e-commerce is filling is killing two birds with one stone. This is a time that people don't want to be around other people, and this is also a time that people are focusing on value. If you look at the stores right now, not that many people are going to the stores, but you find that there is the liquidation of many things which is actually happening. So here is a question where it's a perception issue and a reality issue. But if you look at the barriers for going to standalone shops or shopping outlets, the number one reason is to avoid crowded place, People obviously don't want to be near other people for a good set of reasons. Now, is this going to be what I refer to as the Alibaba SARS moment for India and for the world? So, the birth of Alibaba actually coincides with the SARS crisis. And that was a time that, consumers started becoming more comfortable with doing purchase transactions online. And that was the time from where Alibaba started off, they actually, gained disproportionate share from conventional retail, and a lot changed in that time period. So is this going to be that kind of a moment for India and for the world, is the question. Moving to cash, if you look at over the month of April, there has been a significant increase in the non-cash payment. So if you look at across different types, you find that cash is the one which has increased by 18%, but decrease 58%. Consumers have actually said that they have decreased. If you look at the digital side, it is the picture is different, and people at least claim, and this is a place where I would put the caveat of what people do versus what people say. People actually claim that they are going to continue on this behavior, on this trajectory going forward as well. Everything is more digital, ranging from online fitness classes to the more obvious, media consumption. Interestingly, even education, health, which one could never imagine would move online, is moving online. The only caveat or a challenge here I would highlight is the question which one has to think about is, does this actually increase the digital divide, which already exists, right? This is the question which I think is uppermost on people's mind, which is, people have started doing a set of things. Will they continue this going forward? And what you see is a set of things which I described on the previous page in terms of online fitness classes or online doctor consultation, etc. Much lower proportion of consumers say that they're going to continue this in the future, compared to what you see on the top hand side, which is about news, music, OTT consumption, right? So there is obviously a difference in what is really going to stick. Though the one thing which I would say is, if this continues for long enough, it starts becoming muscle memory, right? So that's the one thing to keep in mind, which is there. The second is, many of the things that you see on the top right actually have been around for a long time. So the products actually have gotten better, refined, while some of what you see on the left-hand side are fairly nascent offerings, and therefore the product itself may not be that refined. One final question that we asked people, which was, what did they feel? What would be the recovery time for activities reduced or stopped? It's interesting, I was talking to somebody and I said, what is the first 3 things that you would do when you feel it is safe? And the person said, number 1, I will go for a haircut. Number 2, I will go for a good meal. Number 3, I will take a short break to some place that I can drive to, right? So it's interesting that, if you look at the essential activities, to local travel, to to actually going to a hotel, etc. You see the spectrum, but I think the discretionary part, I think, is going to come back, for example, in travel faster than the functional part. So to my mind, business travel, I think, has taken a permanent reset. So if the business travel was earlier 100, whenever the new normal happens, unlikely that it will start at 100. It is probably going to start at 70 or 80, because people have seen that a lot of things one did not need to actually be physically there. Will that completely vanish? Absolutely not. There is value in face-to-face interaction. If I was having this conversation with many of you in person, I could have gauged by now whether you were engaged or whether you were not. And that's the one part that I miss while doing these kind of webinars. So that's really what I wanted to share and have a discussion on. Like we are at the half hour.
Yes.
Let me just stop here and take any questions from you or the audience.
Yes. So great, insightful presentation, Abheek. A lot of data points, crazy stuff. So saying so much happening all around us. I think looks like, I guess we need to rethink the way which we are looking at market segmentation itself and rename them in some other form. What do you think? Is there a need for a new way marketers should look at market segments and redefine them?
Well, I think that predated the crisis itself, and I think that is going to happen. I think this is going to create a different vocabulary, and marketeers will need to do that, not only in terms of what they do on the PPT slides, but in actually how they approach it.
Okay, so Abheek, with the pandemic in action, and I can see consumer behaviors changing a lot. And yes, it has to change. Market dynamics will change, and needs are changing. Are there any learning from previous lockdown studies to suggest if the new so-called normal, what we're talking about, is going to be the future, or some behavior is likely to go back to the old normal once the upturn shows up? Is there a comparison like that, what you'll have done?
Yeah, so great question. My personal view is, while there are comparisons, let's say, to what happens in China after SARS, or to what happened, after MERS, etc. What we are talking about right now is at a very, very different scale. So one can take some degree of inspiration from the past, but to think that, one can draw linear extrapolation from the past, I think is completely foolhardy. The closest, at least in most of our lifetimes, that I would say is there, I think, is number one, what happened in the US after 9/11. And I'm saying US because I don't think it impacted the rest of the world that much, but I think that created an impact, changed the security industry completely, changed the airline industry completely. Fascinatingly, actually, the profitability of the airline industry because of consolidation post 9/11 has actually improved in North America than compared to in the past. So it's not necessary that it only has a downside because of the consolidation, but the entire airport airline industry changed after that. So I think this is going to have a much bigger impact than that. The one big variable, obviously, is the fact that many of the previous crises are much shorter duration. We've literally not seen anything which has happened of this duration and globally earlier. I think there will be some consumer behaviors, individual behaviors, which are going to change dramatically and significantly. What I was talking about, for example, minimalism, to my mind, is a one big theme which could happen.
Yeah. Minimalism also was picking up to a certain point. So now
Correct.
this has aggravated that entire thing and said, okay, let's go even more minimal. So
Correct.
a big data analytics, again, big game changers. We've been talking about this to all our clients, and we know that this is very important for retail experience and growth and all that. How much of pre-COVID data will stay relevant and useful, especially when you see the sudden disruption in consumer behavior and the current unpredictable nature of the markets, right? So everybody used to base their decisions and strategy based on pre-COVID data. Now, how is the impact going to be on that? So we'll have to like rejig and start from zero again now.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one would need to reset the baseline. At least I would argue maybe 50-60% of the categories, maybe not across the board, but there will be need for resetting the baseline as to what is the norm. However, and I think this is an important part, right? So if I take virtually any category, you see a certain category consumption which is there. You see deviations from the average. I don't think the deviations from the average are going to change dramatically, but the average itself could, could actually undergo a change. So to take an example, if you look at it interestingly, across the world, people spend about 7% of their discretionary, 7% of their disposable income on apparel and fashion. It's one of the few categories where you find that number, consistent almost across the world. Doesn't matter whether you're in a low income country or a higher income country, which is there. So I don't think that itself is going to change dramatically, but to just give you a factoid, um, due to the crisis in the world today, there are about 20 billion pieces of garment which are likely to be liquidated. So 3 pieces of garment for every individual on the planet, right? So this is, just going to change the entire structure. So I think that's something which is going to happen going forward.
Okay. There's some fundamental questions. So are these numbers for India, and what are the sample size for this survey across which cities?
So the sample size across each of the surveys that we did over the last 3.5, 4 months was roughly 3,000 consumers, plus minus 100 in each of them. Covered tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities. There was a small sample of rural, but not statistically significant.
Okay. So there's a question by Sanjay Kapoor, and Sanjay is asking, what is your view on home buying as home becomes the new office for many? Will people go for spacious or modern homes? How do you see the sector playing out?
Yeah, the bulls in the real estate sector are very happy because they feel that the demand for larger houses is going to increase.
Oh, okay.
The bears in the sector believe that the existing inventory, which is already there, at least in many of the towns, and the fact that people are seeing drop in income, is going to reduce that purchase. So honestly, on that one, I would say it's 50-50.
Okay. And what's your view on online music classes after the lockdown is over? Samir Saha asked that question.
I have a personal story to tell here. So about one of my regrets in life was not knowing how to play a musical instrument. I had tried it when I was in school, and I wasn't very good at it. And then my parents convinced me that I should try something that I was better at. So I never learned how to play any musical instrument. About 2 years back, my son was taking some music lessons, and he was pretty good. So I thought, let me also try. So I had somebody who came home and tried to teach me how to play a guitar. I tried valiantly for about 7 or 8 classes. I didn't go
Okay.
anywhere with that, right? Uh, Answering the question now, I think there are some of these where if you really break down. So I was having a discussion with somebody who's changing their business model to an online fitness platform from an offline to an online. And really, if you think about it, in fitness there are three things which are very important for it to be successful. Number one is obviously you need to have the right equipment, etc. The second is you need to have the right instructor, and the third is actually you need to have a group which actually keeps you honest, right? Because as the joke goes, there are many people who take a gym membership on 1st of January or 5th of January, and then by the 20th of January or 20th of February, it all goes away. I think on online classes per se, and that's why even if you look at that data which was there, online hobby classes were things where for which there was an adoption, but many people actually said that they will not continue with this going forward. So if I recall correctly, that number was about 15% for people who said that they will continue with the online hobby classes once the new normal happens. And I think the reason for that is physicality and discipline is a bit easier to adhere to when you have somebody right in front of you. I think if we can find models through which that discipline, sense of group can be replicated, otherwise the answer could be different.
And plus interactivity too, I guess. Like today, the earlier point, what you were talking about, we could gauge when we were talking how the audience is reacting. We don't know yet, correct? So more interaction is going to come in, more AR, VR kind of stuff is going to come on meetings like these, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading an article. I'm forgetting in which magazine, which basically talked about the fact that in Zoom, because there's an optimization algorithm which operates, it actually takes away some of the tonal nuances, and therefore it becomes more difficult to figure out whether the person is lying or not, right?
Okay.
So which is a cue that you can pick up in a
Face to face.
face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
And while right now people are doing many business transactions, deals, etc., remotely or on video, I'm not sure whether it is easy to establish a new business relationship of trust only through a video or other platform. And if you get into the whatever neurobiology of that, at least that Zoom article seemed to suggest that because our eyes and ears can't sort of genetically decode that nuance is why we respond that way.
Interesting. I think qualitative consumer research is going to be a big challenge now.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
At
so
least,
Rahul, yeah, sorry, go on.
no, one other thing, so I was having a discussion with a large company who's actually done a great job in sort of this entire remote meeting, and a lot of things happen remotely, and uh, it hasn't impacted business too much. And they were saying, we find it very difficult to imagine why this is happening, because earlier we had a satellite office in another city, and those people never got integrated in our culture. But this time, remotely, things are working very well. And my point to them was, you know, right now, everybody is remote, right? So all the 132 people are in their individual rooms, homes, houses, and therefore it's a very democratically equal relationship which is there, right? If 66 of these people were actually on Zoom and 66 people were in a room directly, the nature of interaction would have changed,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So that's the thing to keep in mind right now. A set of things which is happening is because everybody is in that boat. Uh, but going forward, if that equality can happen, I think that can continue.
So Rahul Yadav is as a question. They are in the business. They hire for some very large retail companies. The recruitment in these companies is almost at a freeze. We know that. And are you expecting more job losses in the near future in the sector? And when are you expecting the recovery to start for the sector? And when can recruitment start in general? What's your take on that?
So, first of all, even retail, I would segregate into, two different parts. For example, food and grocery retail, even in these times, has been much less affected, impacted than discretionary retail. Just as a clarification, I'm assuming the question is more towards discretionary retail and not the
Yes, looks like yes.
food and grocery retail. So for that discretionary retail, it is going to be a function of how the disease unravels. Uh, I have had people ask me, when do I think things will come back to normal? Candidly, I don't think they will get back to normal till we have a good cure or a vaccine, right? The other thing which I think is an important thing to highlight is there will not be one new normal for India. We will have many squiggles. Like you were mentioning, you are based in Bangalore. Till 3 weeks back, I think Bangalore was quote unquote normal, right?
Correct.
It had opened up. When I used to talk to some of my friends and colleagues in Bangalore, they would say that, traffic is back to 80% of normal. Stores had started opening up. There were some companies which did as high as 90-95% of their last year's equivalent number. But now Bangalore is a very different story, right? So to say that there's going to be sort of a linear path, I think we're going to have many of these squiggles at a local level. And when you actually put it all together, then the picture obviously is a very different thing. So the one thing which I would definitely say is de-averaging by geography is going to be absolutely, absolutely critical.
Yeah. Interesting times ahead. So again, like most retail brands and businesses are aware of the importance of data science, AI, machine learning, and we are talking more, saying that okay, now when you're struggling, why don't you do a virtual retail experience of sorts? But with the current resource crunch as well as unpredictable business outcome, there seem to be a very catch-22 kind of a situation.
Yeah.
And in which areas of retail marketing would you advise retail brands and businesses to prioritize, especially their investments in technology? So, if you could, is there a must-have, good-to-have kind of areas?
Yeah. So I think investments in analytics, in some sense, to my mind, are no regret moves, right? So let me step back. I think the first thing is obviously cash is the overriding factor on everybody's mind. So I'm assuming that the question of investment comes when there is cash available. So the two parameters to my mind is, number one, where the ROI on that technology, digital, analytic, whatever you may call it, investment is, an in-year kind of a payback. It is a much easier decision to make. Number one. Number two, I think the analytic based investments are more of a no regret move, because some of those capabilities are going to be required no matter what. I think the place which is a question mark to my mind is big investments, for example, in in-store technology. I'm assuming will go to the last of the line, right? Because when even somebody like Zara thinks about shutting down 1,200 of the 7,000 stores globally, as a result of this, and one would say arguably that Zara is one of the most successful retailers in the world. So this entire thing of in-store investment, I think, is a big question mark. Then I think everything else in between, whether it is in terms of AI, machine learning, etc. I think it's a question of, what is the ROI on the same, what is the fungibility of that investment, and more than ever, to do a proper business case in terms of does it pay back or not is important.
Awesome. So Vicky has a question on sports, and this question is, how do you think the market will react to sponsorship and branding opportunities in sports, digital media specifically or overall? Interesting, because IPL was our biggest season, and IPL has got wiped out this year. So how are brands and businesses going to warm up towards branding opportunities?
The interesting thing is, I don't know how much of the branding investments are being held back because of viewership issues versus spending issues. So what I mean by that is, the data that I showed actually showed that TV viewing actually has increased in this time period faster than any period in the last 5 years, right? So it's actually, people are spending more time on TV. However, ad spending on TV is probably at its lowest in the last 5 years as well. And the reason for that is, the confidence cycle in some sense has come to a stop. Consumers have this issue of confidence. Businesses are, thinking about what happens from a consumer confidence perspective. So, what I call the 3 C's are closely interrelated: credit, confidence, and consumption, right? And all 3 of them can either go in a positive cycle or it can go in a negative spiral. Right now, unfortunately, everybody is at a, sort of lower level of confidence, which is there. The one bright spot, which I would say, and we'll see the numbers come out as the quarterly results, etc., come out. But I was talking about 55% discretionary spend, 50% overall consumption rural. And the good news is, if you look at the last quarter, rural consumption has not got hit. And in a strange way, it may be actually rural India which provides the jump start for the economy.
Rural has grown in comparison.
Well, in comparison, it has definitely grown. Yeah. I think the question is, even on an absolute basis, we'll see when the numbers for this quarter come out. But my sense is rural will significantly outperform urban.
Okay. So there's a question from Suniti. Suniti says, Abheek, you mentioned about this incident being similar to SARS moment for Alibaba. While we have seen the behavior change for people towards online shopping, what does it mean for large supermarket-based retail stores and local grocery stores? In parallel, wanted to also understand how would the startup B2B and B2C ecosystem would evolve.
Yeah, well, that's actually
two pieces to it.
Yeah. Honestly, I think from a retail format perspective, I think the small Indian retailer is the clear winner so far. Okay. Now, if you think about, applying management jargon, he's been nimble and agile. He's taken appropriate risk. He has met the customer requirement, right? That's what, but if you think about it, that is what they have done always, which is there. They gained because of supply side constraints, which were there for both some of the e-commerce players as well as some of the modern trade players, right? I think, however, this trust which which the small retailers have gained is going to stand them in good stead, at least for the next few months. Proximity, lack of crowds is going to be a dominant factor for winning in retail. The large format stores, I think, are going to be more at risk than the small format supermarkets. Because I think people are going to scrounge down on variety. They will want convenience and proximity more, number one. Number two, many of these large stores are located in crowded areas and people will want to avoid crowds. And third is just from a equivalent of a regulatory perspective, malls, etc., are probably going to be the last to open. So I think the winners in this are going to be more the e-commerce, assuming that constraints are not there, and the small format stores.
Yeah. Travel and tourism, again, practically shut 100%.
Yeah.
What do you think they should be doing? And in your, this one also, I saw that is one of the last things to recover.
Yeah.
So what could be some of the measures they could take to survive through this storm? So I think 6 months to a year is kind of wiped out. I know a lot of people who have shut down already.
Yeah. If you look at, that business is a business which has actually got, relatively high asset intensity. It has got more of a fixed cost structure. So, there's no easy answers for a large part of that sector. If you look at what has happened in, some of the Western markets, they've actually received support directly from the government, right? So I think for the travel hospitality sector, at this point of time, honestly, I don't think there is a lot what they can do. Second, I think even in the medium term, at least the business travel, I think is going to see a decline. So it's almost, what I was saying, the new normal for business travel is not going to be 100. It is going to be a lower number than that. Now, whether it is 70, 80, we will see, but it is going to start off and see a significant write-off, at least in the short term.
But leisure travel, is it going to be more like travel, holiday, closer home?
Yeah, but this is, most of the research, consumer research that we've done, people have said, taking a flight versus driving, the answer is clear, right?
Yeah.
So shorter and more, let's say the equivalent of the Airbnb or certified is going to be an important one.
And AR, VR usage of new technology also is going to play a big role, I guess, since digital is some of your passion area. What do you think?
On that one, I think it is a poor substitute,
Okay.
right? Because so I think the government of Greece actually has come up with a Travel Greece campaign, and sort of a virtual site, and it's very good, but I don't think it can substitute for the actual travel experience, because people travel not only to see new places. Yes, that's one part of it, but there are many other emotional reasons rather than just the functional reason of going to a place and seeing something. It is about companionship. It is about taking a break from it's a break from the normal, right? So there's no point in me going to Travel Greece and spending 3 hours and then getting back to work next morning. So that's the one where I think it's a poor substitute.
Yeah. What do you think about the opportunities in agri in this so-called new normal? There's some questions around the same thing about agri, about also about the country of origin to be displayed on the label with regard to the e-tail side.
Yeah.
So right now, the hot topic is China and banning and stuff like that. And at the other level, there is this aspect about the labels coming on all e-tails,
Yeah.
country of origin retails. So, what are the opportunities, especially when you look at the agri segment?
No, so I think, agri sector, I think is ripe for a lot of opportunities. I think really reimagining the agri sector. And, I would argue that the agri sector is one of the most information intensive sector which is there. So if you want to have a successful outcome, which is, your crop to yield the best results and to get the best price, actually at every stage in the crop life cycle, there are decisions which are getting taken, decisions which are getting made with gut intuition and folk wisdom most of the time. But can you actually use information if you are doing, let's say, soil mapping, weather mapping, and so on, so that you are able to do that, could lead to a very, very different outcome. So I think a big opportunity could be the integration of agri and technology. And if I link it to the retail part, I think I would not say country of origin, but having traceability in terms of, you know this this vegetable or this rice, was grown in this kind of an environment, and how, and the traceability and the guarantee of that, in a time where we are seeing greater scrutiny on some of these elements, uh, could at least be a profitable niche. I want to be very clear, right? Because, for large segment, it is not relevant. I think it'll start as a niche there and then trickle down. But agri is
Are we
one sector.
talking responsible farming there, or are we talking beyond that?
No, I think it's beyond that. It is just traceability, right? In terms of, it could be country of origin, but more than that, I think it is also in terms of, city of origin, local, etc. You just want to have, it's like saying, untouched by human hand. Obviously that's not going to be possible for some sectors and categories, but elements like that.
I guess that is where technologies like blockchain and all that is going to play a big role in terms of traceability and all that, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there is some questions by multiple people, especially on the online education bit which is there. So there's one question by Casey Sahu who says, looking at the online education trend on the rise and at the same time the infra and device issues in the rural geography, do you think there will be huge sectoral growth as government might recognize the issue and put efforts for more procurement and distribution through these programs? Abheek is,
I think yes, there's an issue with
looks
one.
like there is an issue in connection.
I'll just check with him. Like he's going to join back again. There was some issue.
Okay.
I think maybe we'll just take a last question. We are out of time also.
Correct. There's some very interesting insights in the chat window. I think everybody should look at reading that. He said we are seeing this more and more that retailers are tending to get orders over the phone, keeping it ready for consumers to pick up to avoid overcrowding. Ram Mohan says, independent of COVID, people will transact online to great extent and expect deliveries at doorstep. The packs being ensured corona-free. I think that's a trend which is going to stay for some time because everybody is going to be very apprehensive about hygiene and all those aspects. That's the primary concern at this point of time. People will not travel either local or outstation except under unavoidable situations. Very true. I think those are facts which is going to stay. And we saw that in Abheek's presentation too, that these are things which will take some time for the behavior to change.
I think Abheek has joined back.
Abheek is here. Abheek, can you hear me? Do you make him co-host?
Yes, he is.
Abheek, can you hear me? He might be muted.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, wonderful.
Yeah. Sorry, something happened to my Wi-Fi, so I'm just joining in from my phone right now.
That's okay. I think these are perils of online meetings. I was very worried whether my connection might go off, but in turn yours went. So I don't know whether law of attraction worked the other way around. Okay, so Abheek, I think I'll take the last question, which was the question which I asked already about online education. Because EdTech is booming. We see a lot of interesting brands. We also happen to launch one or two in between. And very interesting times for that particular category segment at large. While EdTech is booming, and while at the other level, there are so much of challenges which is there for regular traditional players too. So where do you think that segment is headed?
So, honestly, I don't know that segment, that well. So, I'm going to take a little bit of an informed guess rather than an in-depth perspective. My understanding is, the online education system has really seen a high degree of adoption in the last, few months. However, from the experience side, it's still a question mark, right? And to the same point, which when what you were saying, like I think there is a combination of the physical digital probably is the thing which leads to the best outcomes rather than only an online one. So
maybe the traditional guys will have to challenge the status quo and imbibe technology a little more.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, just to end, on a lighter note, I was in Seattle a couple of years back, and the store that I was most keen to see was actually the Amazon bookstore. So Amazon has actually created a physical bookstore in Seattle, which is interesting given their start point. So, the answer is probably a combination.
Digital is the way to go. One last question: what kind of skill to be added during this time? Open-ended.
Oh, I think if anybody was ever arrogant to think that they had all the answers, I think humility is the one skill, characteristic, and an openness to learning. That's what I would say.
Keep learning, keep sharing.
Yes.
Obviously. So thank you so much, Abheek. Wonderful hosting you. And I loved every bit of this moderation, what I did. Very insightful. Thank you so much for taking time out. On behalf of YLC and AIMA, a big thank you. And a big thank you to all of them who have joined today. All the members of YLC, AIMA, and all the others also who's there. The others who are not members, be members of YLC and AIMA. Reach out to Rajni who's here. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Stay
Thank you.
safe.
Many
Safe.
thanks, Laeeq. Thank you, Abheek.
Thank you.